Hey, would you like to be able to measure how fast or how slow you're aging with an accurate age test? And would you like the convenience of one sachet that contains your most common longevity supplements so you don't have to buy a bunch of separate ones? That's the promise one company makes, and I bring on their CEO today on the show to ask them the important questions of how their age tests work and how their supplements were formulated. They have an all-star cast of advisors from Harvard Medical School and MIT, so I was curious about how their products were made. Stay tuned for a cool episode. If you're looking to get thicker, fuller, and stronger hair, then make sure to check out fullyvital.com. The team has come up with 4 unique products that help stimulate hair follicles in 4 different ways to wake them up and get them to start growing again. So again, these products are 100% natural and vegan, so make sure to check out fullyvital.com and use the code anti-aging-hacks to get 15% off your order. Hey, are you enjoying the shows on this channel? Then please make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release new episodes. Our goal on this channel is to help you look and feel younger and slow down your aging so you can live your best life. So make sure to hit the subscribe button down below so you can get notified when we release the next episode. All right, let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome back to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast. Today, my guest is Chris Mirabile, who is a serial entrepreneur, a brain tumor survivor, and the youngest winner of NYU Stern's business plan competition. Chris is known for beating the odds. Early success and failure shaped his business principles, but also taught him the value of living well. Determined to crack the code to longevity, Chris became a self-proclaimed citizen scientist, experimenting with supplements, diet, and exercise, research that led him to create Novos. Now, as its co-founder and CEO, he's leading a nutraceutical company with some of the world's top longevity scientists and MDs that helps people take control of their health span and lifespan. With that said, Chris, welcome to the Anti-Aging Hacks podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So tell the listeners and myself about your background and how you got into health and wellness.
Sure. So it begins when I was 12 years old. I was in a bookstore and I picked up an issue of Men's Health magazine, and I was immediately inspired. I, as a scrawny 12-year-old, wanted to build some muscle and get into good shape. And so I started to exercise every day after school, and I was really disciplined with it. I was even watching my diet, making sure I was getting adequate protein and so on. And so it came as a surprise to me, despite how healthy I was being, that when I was 16 years old, I was on a school trip in New York City when I was suddenly struck by a seizure. I woke up with blood all over my shirt because I had severed my tongue, and I was rushed to the emergency room only to find out that I had a brain tumor in my left temporal lobe. It was larger than a golf ball. They had to do emergency surgery, radiation treatment as soon as possible. Fortunately, they removed it, and I'm here to tell the story. So everything worked out in the end, but it was a very challenging, difficult experience for me. Really changed my perspective on life, what I wanted to get out of it, changed my perspective on health, which prior to that was a very superficial vision of health, one of, exercise, muscle building, athleticism, stuff like that, which is part of health. It's kind of like a offshoot of health. It's a result of good health, but health is much more than that. It's the biology, right? It is making sure that your biological systems are running properly and avoiding disease, essentially. And so this introduced this whole new idea in my mind, multiple, from mortality to diseases and things that most 16-year-olds are not contemplating. Mm-hmm. And so that planted a seed in my mind that in many ways impacted future decisions and things that I did in my life, but ultimately has, I would say, blossomed into what I have now started, which is Novos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great, man. So that's pretty shocking at 16 years old to have a brain tumor, or just realizing you have a brain tumor and to have surgery. What did that change, and what did you learn? Were you at a higher risk for a brain tumor or some of those conditions because of a lifestyle you were living, or where you were, the environment, or how did it come about?
No, you would argue that I was at a lower risk. So I didn't have any, environmental factors. I was exercising, eating healthy, So in that sense, you would think I would have a lower risk. My neurologist told me, I remember distinctly because this was important to me, that the risk of me getting another brain tumor was that of anyone else getting one in the first place, because I had no higher propensity for it in the first place. But that I didn't really accept at first. And so that was one of the reasons why, as soon as 23andMe came out and you could do some genetic analysis, I did. And then I ran that data through some tool sets where I could go beyond what 23andMe provided. And I found some genes, one specifically that said I had a higher propensity for a brain tumor, but not by a dramatic margin. Let's just say around 20%. So instead of 1 in 1,000, maybe it was 1 in 800 for me. So still very low, not enough to fully explain it. It could have just been a random chance mutation, but it was something that was an itch I had to scratch, was learning more and like, where could this have come from? And that was enough for me to feel like, okay, I have a partial explanation for what may have happened, but now let's look to the future and figure out what can I do to try to avoid this from ever happening again, or any other chronic illness for that matter, right? Like, I don't want Alzheimer's or heart disease or anything else. I want to live a very long life and then get sick at the very last moment and pass away quickly, right? As I think most people,
right? Yeah,
in your sleep peacefully,
yeah,
exactly.
Totally awesome. So you've since then you've gone to NYU Stern and you won some awards there, and you started your own startups early on. What made you go the entrepreneurial route?
So it actually began in high school. So prior to my experience with the brain tumor, I had taught myself how to build websites, to program websites in the earlier days of the internet. So this was like 1997, 1998, and I'm dating myself. But I when I was 15 years old, I was working for a New York City technology startup during this like tech bubble that we had, and I got to see that entrepreneurial energy and the excitement of creating something new, and all of the opportunity and the ability to like actually shape the direction of things and impact society in one way or another, depending on how large you can scale. And so that inspired me. And that's part of the reason I went to NYU Stern, was I wanted to learn business, how they functioned, wanted to learn finances behind the business and so on. And but I wanted to stay in New York City. I was from Long Island. I wanted to be close to my family. I loved New York. So the one school I applied to was NYU Stern, and fortunately I got in. And so then I studied finance, economics, and international business. Admittedly, when I first graduated, I got caught up in the finance hype. All of my classmates were going into investment banking. I ended up taking on a job in private equity, and it was one of these cushy. I should take that back. It was long hours and working weekends, but cushy in the sense of making a lot of money and working on Park Avenue. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't for me. I was there for 1 year to the day, literally, and all the while working on a startup. And so we fortunately won NYU's business plan competition. We were the first undergraduates to win, myself and my friend. And so I quit the job. I thought that the entrepreneurial journey would be easy, and this, 21-year-old self who's on top of the world, only to fall flat on my face many, many times, and to realize how much more difficult it actually is than maybe the press or society tends to think entrepreneurship is. And that was the beginning of my entrepreneurial career.
Yeah, totally. That's great. It totally is. It's not as easy as they like you to think. In fact, it's pretty cool and hip to be an entrepreneur now and just hustle and grind, but it still takes years and years to be successful. If you get to be successful. Okay, so let's talk about Novos, which is a company you founded not too long ago. I believe it's been 4 years now, 3-4 years. Or a couple of years, I should say. But I'd like to understand how you got into that specific product, how you picked the team, and what led to creating that.
Sure. So I founded Novos in 2019, but we launched our first product 2 years ago. So there's some time during like an R&D phase and bringing on the talent for the company. How did I start it? Why did I start it? So over, from the point of 12 years old all the way up into my early 30s, I was, while being an entrepreneur in the technology space, I was all the while just um, my passion was health, whether it be exercise or experimenting with different diets, like a keto diet or paleo diet or pescatarian, and then different supplements and what impact could these supplements have. I was constantly like my N=1 self-experimenting and trying to optimize my health and my performance and so on. But while doing so, in the back of my mind, after enough time had passed, I was asking myself the question, is what I'm doing today good for me, not only today, but in the long term? Or is it possible that certain things I'm doing now are good for me today, but can come back to harm me in the future? A concept known as antagonistic pleiotropy is this genetic idea of that our genes are really tuned for survival and procreation. And so it might do so for you when you're 20 years old, but that same gene might come back to haunt you 20, 30 years later and lead to a higher risk of a disease, right? So with that in mind, I started to look at all of these different interventions and try to figure out if it was going to be good for me in the long term. At the same time, coincidentally, there was a paper that was published in a prestigious journal called Cell, which is a seminal paper called The 9 Hallmarks of Aging, which is kind of like the foundation for the longevity science movement. And when I read that, it kind of crystallized a lot of what I was thinking. In the general sense, realizing that we are scientifically figuring out why we get older. And there is the possibility that maybe we don't have to get older, or we can at least put the brakes on it and slow down the process. And why is that relevant? It's relevant because as you get older, your risk for chronic illnesses goes up significantly. So getting another brain tumor, the risk is much higher when I'm 70 than it is when I'm 20. The same thing for practically everything from glaucoma to Alzheimer's to cardiovascular disease and so on. And so if that is my ultimate goal, is to be as healthy as possible for as long as possible, then this is the right lens through which we could look at things. And so I started to research and attend events in the space of longevity. And it became very quickly apparent to me that everything that was being done was either advanced biotechnology or academic, like very early stage academic research. There was nothing clear that I could do as a consumer today, other than what I was already doing, which was watching my food intake, my activity, my sleep, my relaxation, and stress levels. And so I wanted to do more. And I started researching. I had mentioned I was experimenting with supplements. I started researching supplements that could potentially impact these hallmarks of aging, or biological pathways that are related to these, like mTOR and AMP kinase and FOXO and so on. And I then presented scientists with these ingredients and the research and asked them, what's your assessment of this? Do you think that there's promise behind these ingredients? And I was at the time surprised to hear how optimistic they were about these ingredients. I expected them to be pessimistic and say, oh, it's a natural ingredient, doesn't have that much potential, we need to invent new molecules. But that wasn't the case. And so that was the validation point I needed to say, okay, there's something here that I personally know that I would use every day. I would give it to my family, my friends, and my loved ones. And if I would be willing to do that, then there must be others out there who want a product like this too. It might be early. People might not be aware of even what longevity is, but I think we're at the cusp of something bigger. And so I pursued it, and I started to network with the scientists that now came on board as our scientific advisors, and eventually started the business.
That's cool, man. Yeah. You have a pretty impressive list of advisors, at least in your company, and of course, other people that advise you on a long-term basis. So that's cool to see. There are a lot of them from prestigious institutions. Were you just hanging around the campuses, or how did you get introduced to some of these folks?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so the campuses, like we're talking about, like Harvard Medical School and MIT and the Salk Institute. No, it was really through, by attending these events, meeting the right people, meeting the scientists. The scientists seeing the angle at which I was addressing this and seeing the promise to that angle, and then the vision that I had for a business, which was really to, you know, if you think about the supplement market and you think about the pharmaceutical market, they both have their pros and they both have their cons. And what I wanted to do was to take the pros from each of those, as many pros as possible, and to minimize as many cons as possible. So what are some of the pros? For supplements, for example, it is no need for FDA approval. So they're natural molecules that are available for over-the-counter use. So we could be quick to market. We could iterate more quickly. We could create more product lines, so on and so forth, right? On the other side of the spectrum, you have pharma, where their pros are they are meticulous with their research. They do double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled studies. They are really about proving it out in science. Supplements typically don't go that far. They get a little bit of research and then they start marketing the hell out of it. I wanted something that was like really legitimate, really proven. And so I wanted to marry the two. And I felt like in today's environment, we could be more efficient with our capital than a pharmaceutical company is. There are a lot of ways to be a lot more efficient with clinical studies, for example, than what pharma companies do, largely because of FDA expectations, but other reasons as well. There's a lot of waste there. And so I kind of combined the two. And scientists, back to your question, I think respected the vision that I had. And it was enough for them to be willing to then open some doors and make intros to their peers at different labs. And then it was all about me convincing them that they wanted to get involved.
Okay, great. So the ingredients that you and the team came up with targeted initially the 9 pathways or hallmarks of aging, as you said, they were described in that seminal paper in Cell. And so was it you coming up with the prescriptive supplements and the combinations, or was it you just logged all these guys up, the experts in a room, and you said, okay, let's figure this out? Like, what is that process of creating and figuring out the dosages of each of these ingredients?
Yeah. So initially, before I officially launched the company and I was talking to people, I put together like a hypothetical formulation, and I presented it to people, like well-known people, like David Sinclair, for example. I met with him in his lab, and he appreciated the formulation, and he says, I think this is a great candidate or something to start with, and so on. So I was getting some of these validation points, but then eventually, when we officially started the company, I brought on a co-founder who is a longevity researcher, medical doctor, but in many ways a scientist as well in terms of his thinking and the degree to which he researches. And together with the scientific advisory board, we put together a list of candidate ingredients, and then it was largely a process of elimination. So on the Novos Labs website, novoslabs.com, you can go to I think it's in the science section on the top menu, something called approach. And you'll see there are 10 different filters through which we put all of our ingredients through. So things like, has it been shown to extend lifespan in multiple animal species? If yes, that hints at the biopathway that it follows is being evolutionarily conserved. So in other words, most likely to be in humans as well, because evolution finds this to be important. Is it natural, either found in human biology or found in nature? So all of these different filters we put it through, and of course, first do no harm. So there are a whole bunch of ingredients we considered that we removed from the list. Then you have the smaller candidate list, and then it's really about looking into how much research is there behind it, how confident do we feel, are there potential synergies as well as dysergies, so ways that they can have negative synergistic effects with each other, and really just digging into the research and doing so along with the scientists, presenting them with the research, asking them if they have any reservations about ingredients or ingredients that we haven't considered that we should be considering. And it's just a lot of communication, a lot of back and forth, and just really digging into the science behind it. And that was enough to get the initial formulation, which we then tested on people. And then we also did some in vitro and now in vivo human testing. So in vitro testing with human cells, for example, we found that from irradiation, Novos's formula can reduce DNA oxidative damage by more than 50%. We did another study, which we haven't published yet, where we administered chemotherapeutics to human cells, and we significantly reduced double-strand DNA breaks. Another study, which we have published about, we looked at the gold standard longevity drug, rapamycin, and its effect on senescent cells in human keratinocytes, so essentially skin tissue. And we compared that to Novos, and Novos's results were practically the same as rapamycin's results, where we had a senostatic effect. We prevented senescent cells from spreading, and we actually shrunk the size of them by about half. And we did a case study as well, where we administered Novos Core and Boost to a random group of 39 to, I believe, 72 or 73-year-olds, half male, half female, and 73 or 74% of those participants had a statistically significant improvement in their pace of aging, as measured by the best biological age test that's currently out there. And of those who did not improve, the 27% or so, 0 of them actually accelerated in their pace of aging, despite all of the stressors of life and things that might be happening that would normally lead to people accelerating. For them, it stayed static at practically 0. So we had 0 negative results and only positive results. So we did all of this testing as well to really start validating the product, and more to come as in that regard.
Yeah, totally. And I assume that these studies that you're doing, which is pretty cool to see, supplement companies don't typically undertake clinical trials for studies in vivo, in vitro, because it just costs a lot. And like you said, they just want to market and get out there and start selling more, which I appreciate any company that's doing, even in the onset. Cool. If you can do it in the onset, you have the funds. That's wonderful. It's the best case scenario. But like once you start selling and you can do it retroactively a year or two into it as well, that's even just better than not doing it ever and just making all these wild claims, right? Of the ingredients doing X, Y, Z, but what does the complete solution do? And so I appreciate that. I assume that people can, if they're interested, go to novoslabs.com and check out these studies are listed somewhere on the blog or site.
Yes. So in the same science area, there's an area, a link called evidence, or you can go to novoslabs.com/evidence. And that's where we will consistently update that page. It gets longer and longer every few months.
Mm-hmm. So it's from what I understand, or actually I know because I have the product at home.
Oh,
and
great.
Yeah, I didn't tell you this earlier, but I have it, and I got the orange one. It's a sachet. You open up and you put it in water in a little cup and you drink it, and it's super easy, and it's actually quite tasteful. I might say tastes really good. So good job on knocking the taste too. So Chris is holding it up. So yeah, show it to them. It's just a simple sachet that you can eat with your meals, right? That's the recommendation.
Yeah. Just have it with a meal. Ideally, it's not required, but you'll absorb it better if it's with a meal, because there's some ingredients that are a little bit more fat soluble, like glucosamine or rhodiola and so on. But it's orange flavored. There's 0 calories. No sugar, doesn't impact your blood glucose or your insulin levels. So you could technically take it fasting as well. And then we have an unflavored version too. Some people just don't want a flavor for whatever reason. So unflavored works well to mix in a juice or a smoothie, a protein shake, oatmeal, yogurt. It's not the best in water. It has a little bit of a flavor, but when you mix it with something that's flavored, then it's practically undetectable.
Yeah. And that's why you probably added the orange as a flavor too. Okay. Cool. So that's the Novos Core product, which you recommend taking daily. Is it once a day or twice a day, Chris?
It's once a day, 1 sachet a day. What some people choose to do is spread out the intake of it, which you could argue is actually a little bit better. In that case, like I personally will have it. My first meal is lunchtime, so I'll have half of it with lunch, and then the other half with my dinner throughout the course of the day. But you could just have it all at once. It's perfectly fine. You're not missing out on anything.
Totally. Yeah, I like to spread it up myself as well, because then it's more bioavailable over a longer period of time in my bloodstream, which means I absorb and can utilize the nutrients for longer to do better things. But of course, if you just want to take it once a day, go for it if it's easier. What's more important is to do it every single day over bickering over, do I take it a third in the morning and third in the afternoon and
Right.
a third at night? But just it's important to be consistent with some of the stuff, especially for
Right.
things like longevity and aging, because it's a progressive condition, right?
Yes. And it's important to note that the research is done, whether it be the research of the historical research that we use to formulate with the different ingredients, or our own research is done with people taking the ingredient one time a day. So, the benefits that we talk about is coming from one time a day. What you're talking about and what I'm talking about is because we're just like maximalists. We want to get the, most bang for our buck, and it doesn't inconvenience us. So we spread it out, but people don't have to do that if they don't want to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So that's the Novos core product. You also have a second product called Novos Boost, which is basically NMN from what I understand, correct?
Yes. It's nicotinamide mononucleotide. The form that we use is a spherical molecule as opposed to a sawtooth molecule. So what that means essentially is that the way that our NMN molecule is arranged is such that it is more stable than a typical NMN molecule. So everything from oxygen and air to higher temperatures or humidity is going to be less likely to degrade the molecule over time.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And listeners are well aware that NMN and NR increase levels of NAD in the body. And NAD is important, especially as we age, levels decline. And so to help increase energy and to help a lot of enzymatic processes in your mitochondria where it makes more energy, you need more NAD. And so NR or NMN, both of these, and NR stands for nicotinamide riboside, I believe.
Yes.
Both of these are precursors to NAD, and so they will both help. But a lot of people are taking NMN these days. I took NR for a while, but I'm doing NMN as well myself. So that's great to know that you're doing that as well, Chris. Okay, so those are the two ways you're helping people slow down pace of aging, and even I don't want to say reverse because that's making a claim, but at least slow down and pump the brakes on the aging process. Let's talk about the measurement of all of this, right? There's multiple, interestingly, in just a few years now, there's a lot of clocks that are measuring not only the rate of aging, but also how old you are. That's different from your physical or chronological age. And so explain, and I've done a couple of these clocks as well, but I think you've done more, Chris. So talk to us about what are the different types of clocks and what do they measure?
Sure. So I'll first start by saying that, kind of caveat emptor, buyer beware, not all of these clocks are the same, and you should educate yourself on it before you decide to purchase one. We have articles on our blog that go into it and show objective data and what you should be considering. And then ultimately, it's up to you to make your own decision. We believe what we're offering is the best clock out there. It's not even a clock we created ourselves. We're more humble than that. We got it from a lab that we believe has created the best clock in the world, and many others believe it too. It took us 18 months to come to this decision. So biological age clocks are what you said. The intention behind them is to figure out how old you are biologically as opposed to chronologically. And what does that actually mean? Well, your biological age is correlated with your disease risk, your mortality risk, and essentially how capable you are physically, right, and mentally, right? So when you think about someone who's young, who's very athletic and can move around a lot and think very sharp, and then someone who's very old who's not as good with those things, that is what is correlated with biological age. It's also correlated with chronological age, but biological age is a better marker for those things. So there's something called a multiome. The multiome are all of these fields of omics. What does that actually mean? Okay, you've got your genomics, your genes. After your genes, you've got your epigenomics or your epigenome. So your epigenome is the layer that sits on top of your genome, and it determines which genes are turned on or which genes are turned off. After your epigenome, you've got your transcriptome, What's that? That is based on which genes are turned on and off. There's going to be transcription factors that are produced to then lead to your proteome, which is different proteins and enzymes that are produced. And then you can go on to the metabolome and so on. But ultimately, this is how our biology works: is you got your genes, some are turned on and off. And as a result of it, you go down the path, and eventually proteins are created that then lead to different physiological outcomes, turning different things on, turning different processes off, building new tissue or breaking down tissue, and so on. And so all of these could technically turn into clocks, and researchers are creating clocks for all of these parts of the multiome, all of these different omics. The question is, what is the best? And so far, the most advanced form of all of this is the epigenome, epigenetic clocks, as they're called. Now, within epigenetic clocks, you've got another degree of complexity, which is you've got first generation clocks, second generation clocks, and third generation clocks. First generation clocks are, if you've ever heard of the Horvath clock, it's named after one of the inventors of epigenetic clocks. These are almost a decade old, or maybe even approximately a decade old. And those were designed to try to create an output of your chronological age, not your biological age. So their success marker was if they were able to figure out how old you are based on your birth date. They then realized that it's actually better to look at biological age, like your risk of death and disease and so on. And so that's second generation clocks. Some of them are pretty good, but the third generation clocks are really what we're interested in now, because those are the latest, the greatest clocks out there. And within the third generation clocks, the best one, arguably, is called the Dunedin Pace Clock. This is a clock that was created by researchers at Columbia University and Duke University. They followed a cohort of more than 1,000 people in New Zealand throughout their life, from 3 years old to over 50 years old now. And they saw how the epigenome changed over time. And they also collected tons of other data points, like their lifestyle. Were they abused as children? What is their ethnicity? Do they measuring the gray matter and the white matter in their brain with fMRIs, sit-stand tests, grip strength tests, blood biomarkers. I mean, you name it, dozens of these different biomarkers they collected. And then they also looked at disease that these people contracted, mortality. And with all of this, they were able to create an epigenetic test kit that is arguably the most accurate because of the longitudinal analysis and the depth of these biomarkers that they track, and which is able to then tell you your pace of aging. So if you imagine a value of 1 is aging 1 biological year for every 1 chronological year, and that is average. Some people age faster than average. Maybe you smoke a pack a day and you're aging 20% faster than average. And some people age slower than average. And in fact, if you're aging, I can't recall the exact number off the top of my head, but if you're aging by a certain percentage above the value of 1, then your risk of mortality doubles, right? So there's like direct measurements that you can get out of this data. And so we at Novos believe that this is not only the best, and it's not simply based on belief, it's based on talking to countless scientists in the field, but then also looking at objective data. For example, something called an ICC value, which is basically the accuracy of the test. Each time you run it, how accurate are the results? How close to being the same are they? Dunedin Pace has the highest value at 0.97. Most other clocks don't even publish, at least if it's a commercial clock, doesn't publish this information because presumably their numbers aren't nearly as good. So there's a whole list of different things. We actually have it on a table on our website. If you go on our blog and you search for epigenetic tests, there's an article, something to the effect of what to know before purchasing epigenetic tests. And you'll see a table of all of the different things for you to consider. And that's one of them. Now, not only for all of these different objective measures do we think it's better, we also think it's better because it's more sensitive to change than a biological age test, which tells you a biological age number. The pace of aging, an analogy I like to give is if you imagine driving in a car, if you've been driving in that car for many years, there's a certain amount of distance that has accumulated. And for you to then reduce that distance, you would have to turn the car around and then start driving the opposite direction for a long time for you to make a significant impact on years of driving, right? But to change your pace of aging is similar to changing your speed at which you're driving. So if you're going 60 miles per hour, you can press the brake or the gas immediately. The car is going to respond. And it's a similar concept in pace of aging. That number will change faster, and it's going to pretty much determine what your trajectory is going to be looking further out in time. If you fast forward 5 years, 10 years, you can have an idea of how much less you're going to age relative to your peers, to your friends, and so on, who are aging average or above average. You're on mute.
Gotcha. Okay. So this makes sense. So there's one aspect of understanding where you're at compared to how long you've been on the planet, right? What's my biological age? What kind of damage have I done? How much distance have I traveled in this time?
Right.
And then the other aspect, as you're saying, is how fast or how slow am I aging moving forward? So what does that look like in the future? So I'd assume that if somebody was to come at this and say, okay, I'm just getting started, I'm new to aging, I'm going to figure all this out, this is my first test, how would you recommend people go about this? Is there value in getting like the distance test first and then seeing how fast you're aging? Or what's the order in which you would recommend these tests, and are all of them even needed?
So we offer at Novos a kit called Novos Age, and Novos Age includes 3 tests in it.
Mm-hmm.
The Dunedin pace clock, your pace of aging, is by far the number one clock that we want you to focus on within our own kit. So 80% of the emphasis should be on that score. We also offer biological age output too, because people are naturally curious, like, what is my biological age? But what I would say to that is interpret it. Don't take it as seriously as you would take the pace of aging, because it's not as accurate. Like I said before, we believe the most in the Dunedin pace, so much so that we would go as far as saying that the other tests within our kit is not as accurate as that Dunedin pace. So it's something to scratch that itch of curiosity that people have, and so we provide it. But you should really be focusing on Dunedin pace. And then the third result that we offer is your telomere length. So it's one of the hallmarks of aging is telomere length. They're the protective end caps of your chromosomes. They protect the DNA within your chromosomes. And as you get older, the telomeres get shorter. And so based on your chronological age, we're able to tell you what percentile you find yourself in. Now, your telomere length, scientists once believed that might be a good measure of biological age. And since then, we've realized it's not the best measure of biological age, because there's too much variance between two people who are distinct ages. For example, a 30-year-old might have the same telomere length as an 80-year-old. And that's not a direct correlation to their biological age. What I would say about telomere length is, though, where you need to be concerned is when they get too short. If your telomeres are too short, your risk of diseases go up significantly. Like, for example, gastrointestinal cancers go up if your telomere length, which is measured in kilobases, is too short. So what we encourage users of the Novos Age Kit to do is to just see where they are with their telomeres. If they are very short, then maybe consider lifestyle changes, maybe talk to a doctor and so on. But for most people, they won't be that short. And it's reassuring to know that lifestyle changes, supplements, foods, and so on can actually slow down the attrition of your telomeres, or can actually, in some cases, lengthen your telomeres. Mm-hmm. So the purpose of these tests is for you to have almost like a longevity scale. If you were doing a weight loss journey for longevity, this is your measurement, your marker. Not everyone needs to do it, but we proudly put it out there for consumers to use because we believe that our products and our lifestyle advice really does have an impact on people's biological age. We want you to hold us accountable and to run the test yourself.
Yeah, that's cool. So you're offering, like Chris said, the company is offering 3 tests. One is the Dunedin pace, which Chris mentions is the most accurate test. It measures the pace of aging. There's the biological epigenetic test as well, which tells you the distance that your car has gone. And then, of course, listeners have heard about the telomere lengths, and we've talked about that on the podcast. So the length of your telomeres can be told by the 3rd test. Okay, that's great, Chris. I'm glad to see what you guys are doing, changing the world one step at a time. Tell us more about yourself. What does your longevity protocol look like?
Yeah, great question. So I actually have a personal blog, slowmyage.com, where I track my results on these biological age tests. I also track other things like pulse wave velocity or VO2 max and visceral fat and so on. So you can find out a lot of information about my lifestyle and my results on that webpage. But for your listeners who aren't going to visit that page, I'm pretty disciplined with my diet. I'm not extreme with it, though compared to standard American diet, I guess many people would say it's extreme. But compared to longevity advocates, I am. I do have the occasional pizza on the weekend with my girlfriend, right? But for the most part, I'm very disciplined on weekdays when I'm working. I can have a very set routine, and so I don't eat until about 12 or 1 p.m. I finish eating at around 7 p.m. Within that time frame, I consume the Novos longevity diet, which you can find on our website, novoslabs.com/diet. There's a lot of commonalities with Mediterranean diets, but there's also adaptations and changes to make it even more optimal based on what we know about research and what is good for longevity that can be improved from the Mediterranean diet. When it comes to supplementation, of course, I use Novos Core and Boost. And then I also have general health supplements that I take. So essentially the equivalent of a multivitamin, but I don't believe that there is a single great multivitamin out there. So I kind of pieced together all of the components myself, which most people don't care to do, but we do have an article about that on our website as well, if you search for multivitamins. And exercise-wise and physical activity. Every morning I walk for about 2.5 to 3 miles. I go to the gym and I weightlift about 3 or 4 days a week for typically 40 minutes to an hour. At the end of the day, I'll also walk for another 2.5 miles or so. About 2 to 3 days a week, I'll go out for a run, and another day or two I'll bike ride. So all in, practically every day I'm physically active. There's one day where it's a rest day, so I'll only walk, but I'll walk a lot, or I'll lightly bicycle, but just very physically active. I oftentimes work while exercising. So, as an entrepreneur, you're very busy, but I'll walk and take a phone call, or I'll walk and listen to a relevant podcast, or I'll sit on an exercise bike and I'll send emails. So you can kind of multitask while also accomplishing those physical goals. Sleep, I'm very disciplined with. I make my bedroom not very cold, in the mid to upper 60s. I wear a sleep mask. I wear earplugs. Yeah, I mean, those are the immediate things that come to mind, like the most obvious things. I fast every so often, like 24 hours to 72 hours. 72 hours is rare, but I'll do that, maybe once every 6 months or something. Typically, it's more like a 24-hour fast once in a while.
Very good. Awesome, man. Looks like you're checking off all the boxes to get to a long life and a healthy life, and to pump the brakes on the aging. So that's great, Chris. Glad to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on, and love to chat with you and shake your hand at some point.
All right, sounds good. If you're ever in Florida, let me know, or New York. And if I'm in Texas, I'll let you know.
Yeah, and then one other thing, for folks that are interested in Novos, make sure to go to novoslabs.com to check out Novos Core or Novos Boost, which is the NMN, and that's where you can get the supplements. And you guys sell a monthly package, and then you can buy one time as well, right?
Yeah, you can do one-time purchase. We of course give discounts if people commit to longer time frames, as much as a year. Like Novos Core would be as low as $79 per month if you do a year. One thing I want to mention, which I think is very important for people to realize, is that we have very generous dosages of all of our ingredients. So we have nearly 7 grams of active longevity ingredients in our formula, and we charge only $79. Our margins are much thinner than most other companies. If you compare other formulations, they're typically 500 milligrams, maybe up to 1 or 2 grams. We're at practically 7 grams. So we give you a lot for the money, and it's really making an investment in your long-term health.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So make sure to check out novoslabs.com and you can get the products there. So thanks, Chris, for coming on.
Of course. Thank you.